This week on Africa Weekly, we look back at the events that shaped the continent in 2015. Later we bring you the top features broadcast last year. We revisit Kenya's Dadaab refugee camp, which the Kenyan government had threatened to close down due to fears of terrorism. Then we go to Botswana, where local farmers worry that a ban on elephant hunts could hit their pockets. And finally we meet Swaziland's rapping princess. But first, a summary of the stories that made the headlines last year. Muhammadu Buhari was elected president of Nigeria in April, marking the first time in the country's history that an opposition party has democratically beaten the ruling party. Since then, Buhari has focused on tackling corruption and terrorism, vowing to defeat Boko Haram. Over 17,000 people have been killed in Boko Haram's 6-year quest to create an independent Islamic state in Nigeria. Burundi slid into violence in April when President Pierre Nkurunziza said he'd stand for a third term. Thousands of protesters took to the streets and were brutally put down by the army. The president went on to win the election in July, and since then hundreds have been killed. The United Nations and African Union are pushing the government to accept a peacekeeping force to avert civil war. Pope mania in Kenya, Uganda and the Central African Republic kicked off in November as Pope Francis undertook a 6-day trip to the continent. The Pope visited a shantytown in Kenya and both a mosque and refugee camp in the Central African Republic, despite widespread security concerns. Staying with the Central African Republic, the war-torn country finally held a landmark election at the end of December, which it hopes will herald a new era of peace. Relations between Christians and Muslims remain tense, and as many as 70% of its population live in poverty. It was a good and then spectacularly bad year for South African athlete Oscar Pistorius. Released from jail in October after serving 1 year for culpable homicide, he was then found guilty of murder by the country's Supreme Court of Appeal. The athlete will be back in court in April and now faces a 15-year prison term. And the death of Zimbabwe's Cecil the Lion provoked international outcry after he was killed by American trophy hunter Walter Palmer in July. Cecil was wearing a tracker collar as part of an Oxford University research project. It's the world's largest refugee camp. Dadaab in Kenya was created to help Somalis fleeing violence and famine in the early 1990s and holds close to 350,000 people.
Soon after dawn, Bashir Bilal sits surrounded by children chanting Quranic verses. When Bilal came to Dadaab 5 years ago, he found better educational options here than at home in Somalia, where there are few schools and those that exist are costly.
When it comes to chances, here they have a better chance of going through the Quranic schools and even going on to further education. But there, they don't have a chance. They just become farmers.
Kenya's government has hosted refugees from Somalia since 1991, when civil wars started tearing the country apart. Today, Dadaab is the world's largest refugee settlement, with over 350,000 residents. But now, Kenyan officials want the camp shut down, claiming they are a security threat used by members of Al-Shabaab, Somalia's branch of Al-Qaeda.
Don't pretend that because Dadaab is not attacked, Garissa is attacked, Nairobi, Mombasa is attacked, that this place is safe haven. No, this is the breeding ground.
People living in the camps are perplexed by such allegations.
And the government are saying now in Dadaab is the place that people are just recruiting something. And it is the pain that they feel. You know, if you feel pain, you can say everything. But this place is not a place that people are just recruiting.
Despite living in temporary shelters and on food handouts, Dadaab is not a place of universal misery and hopelessness. The camp's thriving economy is worth around $25 million, according to a 2010 study commissioned by Kenya's Department of Refugee Affairs. Ali Saha, a 23-year-old university graduate, runs a cyber cafe here, but says eventually he will return home to Somalia.
I should learn so that I help my community in Somalia. actually want to one day go back with my education. Actually, I cannot tell you it is today or maybe it's next month or maybe it's next year, but I am sure I'll one day maybe go back to Somalia and maybe take part in rebuilding my country.
But until that day comes, Ali's fate, and that of all those living in the world's largest refugee camp, remains uncertain.
No harvest for Swazi. Elephants have destroyed her field and eaten all the corn. It is a recurring issue for the people of Mabele in north of Botswana, where elephants roam free. Her village is located on the edge of Chobe National Park, and according to Swazi, the situation deteriorated when the government banned hunting in January 2014.
During previous hunting seasons, I was able to harvest my crops because the elephants were killed. But this year, due to the hunting ban, I can't harvest anything because elephants have destroyed my crops. I'm so stressed, I don't know how my children and I are going to survive. My husband's salary is not enough.
Before 2014, regulated hunting was allowed. Local communities were given a quota of animals, including elephants and buffaloes, that could be shot. The villagers would sell hunting licenses to specialist companies, bringing in tens of thousands of dollars to the community. Once the source of much-needed income, elephants are now becoming a major nuisance to some villages in Botswana.
Now the community, we used to tell them that conserve so that you get the profits. But now it's not easy to change the mindset and say conserve. Conserve for what?
In Botswana, hailed for its successes in conservation, this debate largely hinges on business rather than moral discussion on animal rights. Even tourist guides fear that the hunting ban will drive desperate villagers into indiscriminate killing.
Officially, she's Her Royal Highness Princess Kanyiso Dlamini, Principal Princess of the Kingdom of Swaziland. But unofficially, she's Pashu, singer and rapper in a country that is still deeply traditional.
Get it? Bruise. I feel like it's bruising. When you're down, listen to the news from above. See what's really good. What's really good. Why are the people so afraid of the hood?
Royalty in Africa is rather different in terms of we don't have the liberty that I suppose European royals have. Don't have the time so much for leisure. For us, it's the culture that drives us to do what we do.
Educated in England, the US and Australia, the princess began rapping as a teenager. Yet, as the king's oldest daughter, she travelled home each year to help lead the annual Reed Dance, where tens of thousands of young maidens dance topless in front of their king. With more than a dozen wives and over 20 children, King Mswati is the last absolute monarch in Africa. And with 63% of the population living below the poverty line, Swaziland has frequently come under fire for its gross inequality and its quashing of political dissent. But the princess remains an ardent defender of the monarchy.
We believe in what the people want. So His Majesty called the country and presented to him that, oh, there is a cry from a minority in Swaziland that something like this should happen. And the people said, we refuse. We want monarchy.
Pashu has become a regular on the Swazi music scene, sometimes even performing at government functions. But with a seat on the King's Advisory Council and numerous charities to run, it's the role of princess she's playing hardest.
With Sepp Blatter forced to stand down as president of FIFA, African candidates have thrown their hats into the ring. South Africa's Tokyo Seswali says it's time for Africa at FIFA, and Liberia's Musa Belisi also hopes to stand, despite failing a series of integrity checks. Next week, we go to Somalia, where developers are building hundreds of new homes after 2 decades of civil war. That's all from us at Africa Weekly. Until next week.